Ever sit there on a quiet day, visualizing the serenity of a pristine, calm pond? Two lotus flowers slowly drift, gently vying for control of their small corner of the world. I've never imagined that either, but that's what Thrive's about, and it's awesome. So let's take a look. Thrive is a two-player abstract game which plays in about 25 minutes. It's an absolutely pure abstract experience. The theme only comes across in the art, and the art is really only on the box and on the board. If you watched the intro to this video, you know how to set it up. So how do you play? You try to capture your opponent's pieces by moving onto them, and the neutral pegs on each piece indicate how it can move. Think of these like a map. Your player peg is the current location of that piece, and the neutral pegs indicate the spots you can move directly to. So initially, each piece can move one space toward your opponent and nothing else. They can't move backward, to the side, just an endless march toward your opponent. But on your turn, you'll move one piece and then place out two new pegs. And these can go on any of your pieces in any spot. So maybe I move this piece one space forward and then I put a peg in front of the current one. Next time I move it, it can move either one space or two spaces forward. And maybe I'll put the other peg on this piece over here in the top right corner. This piece could now move to the spot 2 columns to the right and 2 rows up from its current location. That's it. That's the whole game. Move a piece, put 2 new pegs out. Then your opponent does the same. Repeat until one player captures all but one of their opponent's pieces. The great thing about Thrive is that it's a really accessible abstract. It's easy to set up and super easy to teach. If you watched this video, you learned the entire rules in about 60 seconds. From there, it plays smoothly and is a really rewarding experience because it avoids some of the biggest pitfalls of abstract games. Those are lack of theme, being hard to play well, and not tolerating skill disparity. So let's take a look at those. A lot of players are immediately put off by the lack of theme in abstracts. They won't even give them a try because they think they're dry and boring, more like math problems than games. But Thrive takes a similar approach to other modern games with abstract elements like Patchwork or Azul. It takes a light theme and combines that with pleasant artwork and nice components, which is just enough to get players to the table. Abstracts are notoriously hard to play well, often being arcane, brain-burning experiences. Take Go, for example. Go's a popular 2,500-year-old game. There's even professional tournaments. But it's widely accepted that if you didn't start playing the game as a child, you will never be able to be a pro, and probably not even a high-level amateur. It takes that long to learn. But in Thrive, the game state begins simply and evolves from there. As the pieces become more flexible in their movement, there's more to consider each turn, but it builds slowly, and it never reaches a point where it's overwhelming. So you're not going to sit there painfully trying to figure out your next move and your opponent's next move and the next 4 moves after that. It's simply not necessary. Now, I've got a theory about why this is, but it's a bit mathy, so I've included it in the Afterthoughts section at the end of this video. Back to Thrive. It also avoids the other trap of abstract games, which is that they reward repeated play by opponents of the same skill level. In most abstracts, the better player will absolutely demolish a lesser one, and that's probably true here, but it doesn't feel like you need to invest hours and hours to have a good general understanding of the game. You'll play this once or twice, and you'll realize the game isn't actually about capturing pieces, but rather it's about the threat of capturing and wielding that threat. It's a small board, and the pieces become extremely mobile. It won't be long before multiple pieces can be threatened, and with only 6, you can't afford to lose them. So you're planning to capture a piece on your turn, and you know your opponent will retaliate. What do you do to make that go in your favor? This is the crux of the game. You'll need to force trades, setting yourself up for success. So how do you do that? Do you maintain a lot of pieces with a little bit of movement flexibility? Or do you have 1 or 2 that are extremely mobile and can go almost anywhere? Are you playing aggressively or defensively? Do you capture any piece you can, or target ones that your opponent has invested heavily in? These are critical decisions you need to make, and they deliver a real sense of tension. And the game seems to embrace this tension wonderfully and just maintain it throughout the entire experience. There's exactly one word that comes to mind when I think of Thrive, and surprisingly, it fits right in with the theme. Harmony. This is a game about the slow ebb and flow of power within a delicate ecosystem. And while that doesn't come across in a thematic sense, you can immediately appreciate the balance in all other aspects of the game. I mentioned 3 common problems for abstracts: lack of theme, being hard to play, and having low tolerance for skill disparity. And I can't overstate how amazingly Thrive manages to balance these. Now, that's not to say there aren't some problems here. I did have some component issues with my copy of the game. Some of the blocks had a little bit of extra material in them, and I had to remove this with a knife in order to get the pegs to fit. And those same pegs fit loosely in some of the other spots. There's also a bit of a visual challenge here. Every turn the game state can change pretty significantly based on where you and your opponents place your pegs. So you have to kind of reevaluate where you can move. But it can sometimes be hard to see exactly where that is because the pegs are pretty tightly crammed together. Overall, however, I would consider the component and visual clarity issues to be minor criticisms of an excellent game. If you're at all interested in abstract games, you should give this a try. And if you're not interested in abstract games, this one might change your mind. Or at the very least, if you played Thrive and didn't like it, you would know with certainty that abstracts are not for you. And if you're already into abstracts and really appreciate those brain-burning, hard-to-grok qualities, this one might be a little too simple for you. But it also might give you a way to share abstracts with new players, including ones who might be a little intimidated by some of those heavier games. Thrive is simply an amazing game that I highly recommend. Let me know what you think in the comments. Have you played Thrive? Do you like it? Do you agree with my assessment? If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like and subscribe. And if it wasn't helpful, please tell me why. I want to continue to improve these videos, and constructive criticism is incredibly helpful. See you next time. Hey, thanks for staying for the Afterthoughts. This section is for stuff that's interesting but kinda secondary to the main review. With Thrive, I really was amazed by how balanced it was, and it really managed to be approachable while remaining tense and interesting. I was looking for a way to describe this, and I was actually going to borrow a couple terms from video games, from esports: skill floor and skill ceiling. Skill floor is the baseline. Can you play this game competently? An important distinction is that it's not the same as knowing the rules. You could be familiar with the rules to a game and still find it incredibly difficult to play, and abstracts are often deceptive here. Skill ceiling is how much room players have to grow. Tic-tac-toe is a game with a low skill ceiling. It doesn't take long to learn to play optimally, and if both players know how, it ends in a draw. Our earlier example, Go, is a game with an extremely high skill ceiling. So I was thinking about all of this, and I decided to take a look at some of the numbers just to get a sense of how this compares to other abstracts. There's tons of research dedicated to chess and Go and determining the total number of legal moves and which ones are optimal, and there's definitely a lot of study here from a computing and AI perspective. Frankly, I'm in way over my head there. So I took a really simple look at just the first turn of some common abstracts, where I didn't really need to account for a ton of things like legal moves and stuff like that. I'm also pretty sure I've probably made a mistake or incorrect assumption somewhere in here, so if that's the case, please let me know. So, looking at some other games. Tic-tac-toe is played on a 3x3 board and has 9 possible first moves. Chess on an 8x8 board with 20 possible moves. Go, a 19x19 board with 361 moves. Now Thrive is played on a 6x6 board, and there's just 6 possible first moves, fewer even than tic-tac-toe. But unlike those games, turns in Thrive have 2 parts, so you also have to place 2 pegs. And when we account for that, there's almost 60,000 possible first moves. So the pegs are obviously a big part of how many options you have, but as you place them, there's less room for subsequent ones. At the start of the game, each block has 23 open spots, and you have 6 of them. So there's 138 possible spots, of which you need to choose 2. So you have just about 10,000 combinations of where to place your pegs. When we combine this with these 6 possible ways to move your player pieces, that's how we arrive at that 60,000 number. So what happens over time? By turn 5, you've placed 8 pegs. There's 130 spots left, meaning you have about 8,000 combinations remaining. And if you've lost a piece by then, you're down to about 5,500, close to half of what you started with. Meanwhile, your pieces obviously have a lot more than 6 spots they can move to now. Every turn, they can move to 2 new spots, so by turn 5, you've probably gained about 10 options. Now, this is a super basic look at the game, so obviously that doesn't consider duplicates, legal moves, anything like that. But suffice to say, the number of possible spots you can move your pieces to has grown, while the number of combinations of pegs has dropped. And without having to be aware of it at all, these two factors combine in a really beautiful way to limit the number of choices you have to consider. And while the number of combinations of pegs looks big, it doesn't feel as consequential as moving your pieces when you're actually playing the game. So you tend to be looking at and assessing where you want your pieces to be, and using that to heavily influence which pegs you consider. For instance, at the start of the game, there's a good chance you want to move forward, meaning you're probably considering the first 2 rows on each player piece. And that means you only have about 1,700 combinations rather than 10,000. Now, I also gave some thought to the number of possible combinations of pieces on the board, and I'm pretty sure this number is absolutely astronomical if you consider the unique configurations that each piece can have. However, I'm not actually sure how to account for that, and I don't know that it matters. Ultimately, regardless of what's happening on each piece, there's only 1.2 billion ways to arrange 12 pieces on a 6x6 grid. And that sounds like a large number, but compared to something like Go or chess, it's actually pretty tiny. And that's it. As your movement options increase, your peg placement options decrease. And there's some definite interpretation by the player where you're probably going to favor particular moves. Maybe that's suboptimal play, I don't know, but these factors combine effortlessly, and that's why I think Thrive feels so accessible, and that accessibility is what makes it an amazing game. See you next time. Gonna fix this so that's upright. Boop, 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 boop-a-dee-doo. Ba 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 da da ba 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 boo.